Databases. Database is a computerized record keeping system that is called database system. First one for ER model. ER model stands for an entity relationship model. It is a high level data model. This model used to define the data elements and relationship for a specified system. It developed a conceptual design for the database. It also developed a very simple and easy to design view of data. In ER modeling, database structure as a diagram called an entity relationship diagram. For example, suppose we design a school database. In this database, the student will be an entity with attributes like address, name, ID, age, etc. Next one for ER diagram. That is a different types of symbols to the ER diagram. First one for rectangles, ellipse, diamonds, and so on. The example, student table. There is a 4 types of field: name, address, ID, age. Next one for entity. An entity may be any object, class, person or place. In the ER diagram, an entity can be represented as rectangles. Consider an organization as an example. The employee and department is a rectangle symbol. Diamond symbol used for the works for. Next one for attributes. The attributes used to describe the property of an entity. Ellipse is used to represent an attribute. For example, ID, age, contact number, name, etc. can be attributes of a student. Key attributes. The key attributes used to represent the main characteristics of an entity. It represents a primary key. The key attributes is represented by an ellipse with the text underline. That is a ID is the key attributes. Composite attributes. An attributes that composed of many other attributes is known as composite attributes. The composite attributes represented by an ellipse, and these ellipses are connected with an ellipse. Multi-valued attributes. An attributes can have more than one value. These attributes are known as multi-valued attributes. The double oval is used to represent a multi-valued attributes. For example, a student have more than one phone numbers. Next one for derived attributes. An attributes that can be derived from other attribute is known as the derived attributes. It can be represented by a dashed ellipse. For example, person age change over time and can be derived from another attributes like date of birth. Next one, mapping constraints. A mapping constraint is a data constraint that expresses the number of entities to which another entity can be related to the relationship sets. It is most useful in describing the relationships sets that involve more than two entity sets. For example, for binary relationship set R and an entity sets A and B, there are 4 possible mapping cardinalities. First one for 1 to 1, second one for 1 to many, third one for many to 1, fourth one for many to many. First one for 1 to 1. In 1 to 1 mapping, an entity is associated with at most one entity in E2, and an entity E1 is associated with most one entity in E1. Next one, 1 to many. In 1 to many mapping, an entity in E1 is associated with any number of entities in E2, and an entity in E2 is associated with at most one entity in E1. Next one for many to 1. In 1 to many mapping, an entity in E1 is associated with at most one entity in E2, and an entity in E2 is associated with any number of entity in E1. Next one for many to many. In many to many mapping, an entity in E1 is associated with any number of entities in E2, and an entity in E2 is associated with any number of entities in E1. Next one for keys. Key is the identifier record in the database. Keys plays an important role in the relational databases. It is used to uniquely identify any record or row of data from the data table. It is used to establish and identify relationship between tables. Next one for different types of keys. First one for primary key, second one for candidate key, third one for super key, fourth one for foreign key. First one for primary. It is the first key which is used to identify one and only one instance of an entity uniquely. An entity can contain multiple keys as we saw in person table. The key which is used most suitable from this list become a primary key. Next one for entity relationship diagrams. What is the entity relationship diagram? An entity relationship show the database of an entity sets stored in a database. An entity in a context is an object, a component of data. An entity set is a collection of similar entities. These entities can have attributes that define its properties. By defining the entities, their attributes and showing the relationship between them. An ER diagram, the logical structure of the database. ER diagram are used to out the design of a database. Weak entity sets. A weak entity set is an entity set that does not contain sufficient attributes to uniquely identify its entities. In other words, the primary key does not exist for a weak entity set. However, it contains the partial key called a discriminator. A discriminator can identify a group of entities from the entity sets. Extended ER feature specialization. An entity sets may be include the subgrouping of entities that is distinguished some way from the other entities. In the other words,